You got questions? He always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity, this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Switch gears and talk a little bit about these indictments that were announced on Friday. 13 Russians, 3 companies, this conspiracy that started back in 2014, according to Rod Rosenstein, who briefed the press, Deputy Attorney General.
Long before President Trump was a candidate. It's
remarkable, though. I don't exactly get David Remnick at the New Yorker and all the other leftists in the D.C. press corps crowing about these indictments like they somehow undermine the position that President Trump and his administration has taken. I mean, listen to Rosenstein detail what these individuals, these Russian agents, were attempting to do in terms of disrupting and dividing America.
After the election, the defendants allegedly staged rallies to support the president-elect while simultaneously staging rallies to protest his election. For example, the defendants organized one rally to support the president-elect and another rally to oppose him, both in New York on the same day.
And that's after the election. Before the election, they included, according to Politico's report on Friday, and the indictment, for that matter, aiding and abetting Bernie Sanders, Comrade Bernie, against Hillary in the primary. It was all about disruption and division. And to the extent Americans were involved, they were involved unwittingly, according to Rosenstein.
Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
So it didn't alter the outcome.
No, didn't alter the outcome. No participation by Americans.
Only participation unwittingly, and...
So they created hundreds of fake social media accounts to spread fake news.
Right.
If you're dumb enough to fall for it, it's like a phone scam. I mean...
So how does this exactly advance the cause of Mueller's investigation, the collusion investigation? Where does this go with respect to Trump? Because don't forget, now you have to add in, to the extent, there's still the potential of obstruction of justice, Trump's firing of Comey. Well, you also have Comey and Rosenstein both say in testimony before Congress that the administration never attempted to disrupt the investigations that were ongoing at the time they testified. So I'm not exactly sure what you got here other than what we've always had, Russia trying to interfere, the last 100 years, interfere in our domestic affairs to our detriment, and to some extent doing so successfully because look how divided we are because, of course, the D.C. press corps took this up and ran with it. They're not interested in facts. They're interested in taking down Trump. But the more that is revealed, the more it exculpates Trump. So what do we got? For more on this topic, perhaps answer to my question, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Steve Cortes, Fox News contributor, former Trump Hispanic Advisory Council head. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Thanks for having me.
So can you help me on this matter of these Russian indictments and what the implication is, other than the fact that we have Russia trying to meddle in our affairs, which should come as a surprise to no one?
Right, exactly. And listen, I've said that on air for months, that I have no doubt that Russia, meddles in our affairs, as they have done since the Bolshevik Revolution, by the way.
Yeah, right.
And by the way, among other countries, do we think that the Chinese were uninvolved completely in our election, that they're incapable of using social media and technology means to try to foment discontent in the United States? I don't know that they were involved, but I'd be shocked if they were not involved. So among other countries, we know that Ukraine was involved on the other side, on a very anti-Trump level. We also know, by the way, that the Russians were not just pro-Trump, apparently, in some of they were, as you mentioned, anti-Trump after the election. So it's more about discord than anything else. They were also pro-Bernie Sanders, which I find fascinating. And I've yet to hear from Bernie or any of the Bernie folks to talk about that aspect of it. But let's also not
the one actual fellow communist in this whole discussion.
But I think, too, it's important to keep this in context. Let's not overstate this. Okay, did they have some limited success? Perhaps they did. Perhaps they switched a few minds. Perhaps they polluted a few social media streams with misinformation. But we're talking about, I think, roughly a dozen operatives spending $1 million or $2 in a race where the candidates alone spent $1.3 billion, and that's not including all the massive amount of outside money involved, a race that probably consumed American society more, certainly in terms of media and social media, than any race in our history. So, I mean, you're talking about literally, a pebble in the ocean of information that was out there. Now, does that mean we tolerate it? Of course not. I'm glad they're indicted. They're never going to see a U.S. court, of course. But nonetheless, it's smart, I think, for us when we have these kinds of actions, just as we should indict, I think, a lot more Chinese cyber criminals. Again, they'll never see an American courtroom if we do it, but it still makes sense to say that we take crimes against America seriously, whether it's our election, our intellectual property, hacking, all of the above.
Yeah, Putin's not going to extradite any of those 13, including his chef. So do you think that this is the end of the story?
Well, I hope so. By the way, too, the one reason to indict them, Amy, it does have a tiny bit of teeth for these folks who are probably well-to-do Russians, but for the most part, it does prevent them from traveling to countries that are friendly to the United States because they would get extradited. So no more vacations to London for them or to Paris or Rome.
Right.
And that does matter, right?
Right.
They can basically go to Russia and China and Belarus. So have fun with that.
Now, this doesn't necessarily end the Mueller investigation, nor should it. Go ahead, continue your investigation. There's still the question, as Jonathan Turley, George Washington University law professor, said, the remaining question could be whether Trump wittingly obstructed an investigation into unwitting contacts with the Russians. It doesn't seem like that's particularly likely, but it's an open question that I'm fine to have Mueller investigate and answer. And when that question is ultimately investigated and answered, and they seem to be moving right along and finding the answer to it, then is there anything else? Can we wrap this up?
Well, I sure hope so. I will tell you, I'm fine with it being investigated in theory. I'm not fine with Mueller being the one doing it, given the way he has conducted his investigation so far, particularly in terms of personnel. Strzok being by far the worst example, but not the only. He has assembled an incredibly biased team, at least based on their history, an incredibly biased team. He's investigating matters in which he himself was deeply involved as FBI director, close personal friend and confidant of James Comey, around whom really any obstruction case would have to be centered. So I think he's insanely conflicted, and he should not be in this position. And the fact that he is tells me that he himself has some problems. There's a corruption to his judgment. So I'm worried that what he's going to try to do is construct an obstruction case, a flimsy one. He'll concede that even if there were actual obstruction, you really can't indict a sitting president anyway. So I think he's going to issue a report that there is evidence of obstruction. He'll detail it. He'll say, but I can't indict him no matter what. And then he'll punt it and hope that, I hope I'm wrong on this, but he will hope then that the Democrats take Congress, take the House in the fall, and then use that as their first movement toward impeachment. I really fear that that's where this is going. That's where the Washington establishment wants to take this. They want to take a flimsy obstruction argument, which doesn't really hold water, which is not indictable, but they want to use it as a pretext for impeachment.
All right, let's move on to Florida. Apparently, and the FBI admitted they dropped the ball. They didn't pass on information. Somebody calling about Cruz on January 5th saying that, he's a danger, that he's going to, they're just worried about his erratic behavior, disturbing social media, the potential to conduct a school shooting. And President Trump over the weekend on Saturday tweeted out, very sad that the FBI missed all the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They're spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There's no collusion. Get back to basics and make us all proud. And that social media is outraged because they believe that Trump's blaming the Florida shooting massacre on the Russian investigation. What do you think?
I will say, I think this tweet was ill-advised. As much as I admire the president, I'll criticize him when I think warranted. And in this case, he's absolutely right. The FBI does deserve criticism, clearly, for dropping the ball here. And I mean, dropping the ball is a euphemism. I mean, it's horrific, right? What unfolded because of incompetence, probably, right? This could have been stopped and should have been stopped. And two different citizens did what they were supposed to do, which is warn authorities that there's a dangerous guy out there with terrible plans. And authorities twice dropped the ball. But then to make the connection to Russia, that's a big leap and a big stretch. It's not as though the Florida field office is somehow obsessed with the Russia investigation. I understand where he's coming from. I really do think that the president is just so sick of dishonest attacks against him that have, as a candidate, as president, have just persisted nonstop from the mainstream media and from the Washington establishment. So I understand his angst. I understand his anger But to connect the two, I think, yes, is a mistake and is a bit disrespectful, to be frank, I think, to the victims and the people grieving in Florida right now to say that Russia has something to do with it when I don't think it does.
Governor Rick Scott, governor of Florida, called on Christopher Wray to resign because of the FBI's failure here, specifically the failure to report that tip they got last month to the Miami field office for follow-up. What do you say to that call?
I think he should. And, the FBI, I think, unfortunately, is a group of thousands of really brave people doing dangerous stuff to protect us. But I think that the leadership of the FBI has been horrendous. And I count Mueller and Comey and perhaps now even Wray in that fold. I mean, look, somebody has to pay a price. There have to be consequences when these kinds of mistakes happen. By the way, I said the same thing in terms of, again, I'll criticize the president and the White House when I think it's warranted. I said the same thing about the Rob Porter episode. Somebody needs to pay a price. There was clearly a breakdown in the process, whether it was the FBI side or the White House side. Somebody clearly fumbled there, and there has to be a price. And I think the price is somebody losing their job. In this case, it's so horrific with 17 dead Americans that I think, yes, it really should call for, I think if he's a man of honor, he'll offer that. He'll say, you know what, I didn't do it. I didn't take the phone call, but it's my organization, and we have to show the American people how seriously we take this, how seriously we take their safety. It's the mission. It is the mission of the FBI. And so I think he should resign himself, and if he doesn't, there should be pressure on him too.
He is Steve Cortes, Fox News contributor, former Trump Hispanic Advisory Council head. Steve, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Happy President's Day.
Yes, go get that mattress that you've had your eye on. Thanks, Steve.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.